In the year of 1987, a year after the comic Watchmen began to be published, the writer Alan Moore sent a letter to the DC offices with a proposal for a new comic. This new story, which would be titled The Twilight of the Superheroes, would talk about a dystopian future in which there are several dynasties of superheroes called houses who rule different territories of the United States. This comic would tell us how these Game of Thrones type superhero houses face off in a final battle that threatens to destroy the world, and how two characters, John Constantine and Rip Hunter, take actions to travel to the past and prevent this future from happening. The story is very dark and takes some of the characters we know to places we would never have thought of. However, before this comic could be carried out, Alan Moore had a falling out with DC Comics, and the only thing that survives from this story is the letter in which Moore tells fragments of it. In this video, I'll share the contents of the letter, starting with the intentions that Moore had for telling this story. What would the DC universe be like in this future according to Moore? And above all, what is the plot about? Because this letter doesn't talk about it. It's worth mentioning that Moore himself mentions in this letter that his story is not entirely complete, that there are some details to be refined and he could change some things in the end, but we can get a very good idea of what his story was going to be like. I also remind you that since this story was never carried out, there are no images or sketches about it, so I will be illustrating the video with some images from other comics, as some of the ideas that Moore mentions in the letter were used in comics like Kingdom Come. My name is Go, the Geek Monitor, and today we are going to learn about the never-published story of Alan Moore.
Go, the Geek Monitor.
Chapter 1. Moore's initial plan. Moore begins his letter by explaining why he wants to tell this story, and it's truly a Moore you've never seen before, as he talks about how this story can benefit the DC universe in terms of both quality and sales. A stark contrast to the grumpy old man we know today. In his letter, Moore first mentions his belief that one of the biggest issues with superhero stories is that they rarely have a definitive ending, and this prevents them from acquiring an iconic character. In other words, sales force publishers to keep superheroes frozen at a certain time in their life, which does not allow them to grow. That's why, for this comic, Moore takes inspiration from the myth of Ragnarok, also called the Twilight of the Gods, which tells the last days of the Nordic gods, to create this story in which he intends to end the power dynasties within the DC universe. In the letter, Moore also mentions Frank Miller's comic The Dark Knight Returns as inspiration, as Miller managed to put a certain end to the Batman myth, something we can also see in Alan Moore's comic Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, which serves as the definitive end of the first 50 years of Superman stories. If we look at stories like this, we can realize that Alan Moore always felt a certain fascination for the fact of giving closure to the characters' stories. This was a crucial point in the story, but Moore also wanted to address another issue. Moore felt that another problem within comics had to do with the concept of the big crossovers, like Crisis on Infinite Earths or Legends, which have a central story but are forcibly expanded across other titles of the company, forcing writers to modify their stories to fit with the crossover. This in turn leaves readers buying stories that have little or nothing to do with the big crossover and were written simply to fill a quota. What Moore wanted to do then with this story was to create a crossover that respected the integrity of the writers, while at the same time bringing economic benefits to the company. Moore's proposal was to create the central story of the Twilight of the Superheroes, which would be set 20 or 30 years in the future over 12 comics, and show two central characters, Rip Hunter and John Constantine, making brief appearances in other DC comics, warning the various characters of the future that is to come. However, each creative team of each title would choose whether or not they wanted to participate in the crossover and to what extent. The idea was that Rip and John would arrive with the warning to some characters, who might modify some behavior in their comics to prevent the future from happening, or perhaps decide not to believe them, so their comic would continue as always. If any creative team did not want to participate at all in the crossover, the story would show that Rip and John could not locate this character for some reason, and all these decisions would be reflected in the central story. In the first part of the letter, Moore discusses marketing topics, something we are not used to seeing in him. Moore states that this comic provides an opportunity to introduce new characters, like perhaps a female Flash who in the future has been part of the Justice League for years, but when readers see this new character start to appear in current comics, they would wonder if the future of Twilight is starting to happen. He also mentions that there could be a marketing campaign across several comics that contain the legend waiting for Twilight, very similar to what he would later wish in comics like Countdown to Infinite Crisis, which could also be used on t-shirts and various merchandise. He suggests his main story could be adapted for role-playing games, video games, or a movie. Moore talking about making a movie is very rare, as he is currently very against the film adaptation of his comics. However, as I tell you, this is another Alan Moore, an Alan Moore before his fight with DC. If you want details on Moore's battle against DC, I just posted a TikTok sharing the story. Follow me there to check it out. Now that we have the context, let's see how Moore imagined the characters in this future. Chapter 2. The characters of the story. In this future, superhero dynasties control the world. Not because they forcefully took control like Injustice's Superman, but due to the institutions and governments created by humans. They were gradually dismantled, and people decided to trust in the superpowered characters to make the decisions that would be most convenient for everyone in this new part of the United States. Each realm is protected by groups of superheroes who have divided themselves into clans called houses. More or less as if it were a feudal system, and the houses are as follows. House of Steel is the house formed and led by Superman, which has its base of operations in the Arctic Circle in a new fortress of solitude. In this comic, Superman would be presented as a morally tormented figure, as he does not know what to do with the chaos around him, but he has accepted that the houses provide the only functional structure in the world, so he must maintain this status quo. In the future, Superman marries Wonder Woman, who adopts the name Superwoman to give more stability to the house, and they have 2 children. Superboy, described by Moore as a delinquent and sadistic sociopath, and Supergirl, a kind girl who resembles more what her parents used to be in the past. Then we have the House of Thunder. It's the house of the Marvel family, whose patriarch and leader is precisely Captain Marvel, who married Mary Marvel, and they had a daughter named Mary Marvel Jr. Here we have to remember that in 1987, the character that we know today as Shazam was known as Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel Jr., a member of this clan, is as powerful as his mentor, but has always been forced to live in his shadow. Not only that, but he is having a secret romance with Mary Marvel. The situation becomes more tense as Mary Marvel Jr. is about to marry the sadistic Superboy, a marriage arranged by the leaders of both houses to achieve a strategic union between the 2 most powerful houses on Earth. Finally, Moore also tells us that Captain Marvel is suffering because he can't completely let go of his alter ego Billy Batson, like the other members of his house have done, and that, due to magic, Billy is still trapped in the body of a child even though he has the mind of an adult. These are the 2 most powerful future houses, and a central point of the comic was their union, which would be carried out with the marriage of Superboy to Mary Marvel Jr. And this makes the lesser houses nervous, which are the following. House of the Titans. They are the adult and dark versions of the characters known as the Young Titans, who are led by Nightwing, who is now a much more violent, bloodthirsty, and compassionless character due to the death of his partner Starfire, who was killed during the Great Purge of aliens. I'll revisit this later in the video. In this house, we also have Cyborg, who is becoming more machine than human due to constant repairs. But he gains some sense of life by having to take care of Beast Boy's character, who is slowly forgetting what it means to be human as he spends entire days transformed into an animal. Not only real animals, but mythological creatures that seem hybrids between animals and humans that only inhabit his nightmares. Hey Moore, not even Snyder dared so much, but let me tell you, things get even darker. The team includes the powerful sorceress Raven, who remains with the Titans out of loyalty, despite believing her abilities could be better used elsewhere. Justice Strip are the remnants of the Justice League that we see through characters like Captain Atom, who is the most powerful member, Blue Beetle, the new Wonder Woman, who was previously Wonder Girl, Wally West, and the new Flash. Tomorrow's Strip are time travelers who got stranded in this era, like some members of the Legion of Superheroes. This is where the future John Constantine recruits Rip Hunter to search for the past Constantine. House of Mystery. They are supernatural characters with magical powers like Satana Spectre, Jason Blood, and Dr. Fate. House of Secrets. They are the only supervillains who survived the great supervillain purge. That's right, there's an alien purge and a supervillain purge. I'll explain both to you in a bit. Characters include Lex Luthor, Joker, Gorilla Grodd, and Catwoman. It's a house strong enough to defend itself from the attack of other houses, but generally they do not attack nor are they attacked, as they protect their Nevada territory as well as any other house of heroes. Finally, there is the House of Lanterns. In this last house located on one of the moons of Mars are the Green Lanterns, who were banned during the Alien Purge. This group, made up mainly of Guy Gardner, Sinestro and Carol Ferris, is forming alliances with other races such as the Tanagarians, as they fear that the union between the two most powerful houses will give Earth too much power to the point that they could become a cosmic threat. This house has a secret weapon called Sodam Yat, the Supreme Green Lantern, who in addition to having the power of the Lanterns, has Daxamite super strength, which can rival Kryptonian strength. These are the houses, but there are also other central characters in the story who do not belong to any of them. Moore also briefly mentions them in his letter. A significant character in the story is the future John Constantine, who is happily married to a girl who seems to have filled the existential void he had. That's why John is devising a plan to protect the world from the threat of superhumans. Moore also tells us that there is a kind of ghetto where former superheroes who don't belong to any house live. Most of them are retired and decaying people. Many of them are drunk and some even engage in prostitution. Green Arrow and Black Canary also live in this ghetto, who now have a newspaper that is responsible for spreading the truth about the houses, and have Big Sage, that is the Question, as a reporter who is currently investigating a mysterious murder involving a dwarf in a brothel. This is a crucial plot detail with an unexpected twist you won't see coming. Finally, we have Batman. In the future, Batman returns to being an urban myth. No one has seen him for years. Some rumors say he's dead, but there are also rumors that he's active and working on something big. The truth is that he and another detective character, who also has no powers named the Shadow, are preparing a plan to free the world from superhumans. Moore's idea, if possible, was to have Doc Savage and Tarzan on this team, who would be a council of humans representing this stage of the pulp magazines of comics. These are the characters that Moore mentions in his letter and what the context of the DC universe would be in this future. Now, with this in mind, let's see what the plot sketch is like. I'm going to try to tell it as a story since Moore doesn't tell it this way. Instead, he goes back a bit to character exposition, gives editorial details. So, well, I hope you like it. This would have been The Twilight of the Superheroes Chapter 3. The Twilight of the Superheroes. After living under the fear of a nuclear holocaust that never happened, of a war that never occurred, humanity realized that it would survive. This, far from being a blessing, turned out to be problematic, as we humans were so accustomed to the idea of global extinction that we were not entirely clear about what we would do in case of survival. As a result, the institutions we built, such as governments and the economy, slowly began to crumble, which made the world's supervillains want to seize the opportunity to take control of the Earth. When this happened, the world's heroes made the decision to unite into a large army to free the world from all the supervillains once and for all, something that would come to be known as the Great Purge of Supervillains. On this occasion, we humans watched in awe as these gods walking among us freed us from evil, and we decided that they would be the anchor that would give us stability. We decided to give them the power, and they didn't even have to ask for it. When this happened, one of the first actions of the new superhero government was to ban alien intervention on Earth, which resulted in races like the Tanagarians or the Lanterns not being able to operate in our world. However, this decision was controversial, and heroes like Starfire fell into this so-called alien purge, while other characters like Superman were granted immunity because they grew up on Earth. Besides, who was going to oppose the powerful Man of Steel? Over time, metahumans gained more power, leading to a government system ruled by superhero houses. Each one had a fraction of the power, and each one would be in charge of governing and taking care of a part of the former American territory. In fact, even some surviving supervillains adapted to the circumstances and formed their own house. Everything seemed fine. However, the balance of this power was extremely delicate, and an event was about to break this delicate peace that had been achieved through force. The two most powerful houses, the House of Steel led by Superman and the House of Thunder led by Captain Marvel, were about to unite through the arranged marriage between Superboy and Mary Marvel Jr., something that had the other houses nervous, as this alliance would cement the houses of Thunder and Steel as an unstoppable force in the world, capable of dominating all the others if they so wished. The House of Lanterns, who had allied with other alien races, also saw this union as worrying as it could pose a threat to other planets, so they are planning a massive invasion of Earth to stop the superheroes. Meanwhile, tension is high in the houses. On one hand, Superman and his wife Superwoman, formerly Wonder Woman, are increasingly worried about the sociopathic tendencies of their son Superboy, while also worrying about not finding an ideal partner for their daughter Supergirl. The only viable option seems to be to marry her off to Captain Marvel Jr., who doesn't seem to be interested in her. This is because he is currently in a romantic relationship with Mary Marvel, the wife of his mentor Captain Marvel. Meanwhile, at the House of Thunder, Captain Marvel seems to be going through a crisis for not being able to leave behind his alter ego of Billy Batson, who, due to magic, was now an adult trapped in a child's body. Fortunately, things seem to be getting better and Captain Marvel's mood seemed to have improved in recent days, although his wife Mary doesn't know why. At the bottom of all this is John Constantine, who, despite being happily married to a woman who seems to have driven away the inner demons that tormented him, is gathering information about the houses, particularly their stress points. Because this happy life is something completely new for John, and he is willing to go back to using his dark and manipulative practices to protect this new life he is in. That's why, when he found out about Superboy's union with Mary Marvel Jr., he began to chat with some lesser houses to sow distrust and fear about this union. He convinced the House of the Titans to form an alliance with others to attack the two major houses on their wedding day when they are unprepared. He also found Batman, who was working with the Shadow, and told them he would help them with their plans to get rid of all the superheroes. However, John's manipulations would not end there, as he also went to speak with Captain Marvel himself and told him that the Titans and other houses would attack them on the wedding day. Surprisingly, they asked him not to stop the event and to stay out of the fight without helping the House of Steel. "Why would I do what you say when my intention is to unite the House of Thunder with the House of Steel?" said Captain Marvel. Constantine simply turns to look at him and lights a cigar. Captain Marvel momentarily steps back and John tells him, "I think you already know why." The captain smiles and gives John a look of approval, letting him know that he will follow his plan. On the wedding day, the minor houses attack and take the Steel House by surprise. However, the battle is still brutal and all the houses suffer significant losses. In the midst of the war, Superwoman kills the new Wonder Woman only to later be killed by Captain Atom. Superboy also dies in the fight, while Captain Marvel Jr. and Mary Marvel decide not to be part of this new world that is forming and head into space with the intention of finding a new place they can call home. Supergirl, seeing her mother kill her old friend, is also disappointed with the state of the world and decides to accompany them into space. When the battle ends, the only ones left standing are Superman, who is seriously injured, and Captain Marvel, who has not suffered any damage as he did not intervene, just as he promised John. As Superman feels victorious, the Green Lanterns, Martians, and Thanagarians commence their invasion of Earth. Despite everything, the Man of Steel feels that he can still win this war if he has Captain Marvel on his side. But here's the big twist in the story. The one by his side is not the real Captain Marvel. The real one has been dead throughout this whole story. Billy Batson had trouble adapting to his dual identity, and these problems were exacerbated because his human body did not age, but his mind did. Billy had adult desires but a child's body, which made it difficult to lead a normal sexual life, so he would sneak into the ghettos looking for prostitutes and domination practices. On one of his night outs, he came across a great escort who took him to a room away from everyone. She put a gag in his mouth and then revealed that it was actually John Jones. Billy tried to free himself, but due to the gag, he couldn't say his transformation word. John then proceeded to break his neck and left his body there in that ghetto where no one would recognize him. He then used his shape-shifting abilities to take the place of Captain Marvel without anyone noticing the difference. That's why he agreed to help Constantine, and that's why he backed off when he lit his cigarette. When Superman learns of what happened, he kills John with his heat vision and, despite being seriously injured, begins to confront the Lantern Army. It seemed like Superman could still win this fight when he faced the Supreme Green Lantern, Sodomyat, who defeated and killed the Man of Steel. The aliens seemed to have won the war and planned to rule the Earth and maintain order, but what was the point of getting rid of one power system only to end up in another? Was this John Constantine's plan? Suddenly, another army of human heroes led by Batman made their appearance and began to attack the alien armies, who were already very hurt. The coup de grace came when Constantine revealed that he had sold the secret of the Boom Troops to an alien race known as the Guardians, who took advantage of the fact that the Lanterns and Thanagarians were busy on Earth and were about to invade their planets, which forced them to withdraw in order to save their home. Constantine's plan had worked. The humans had reclaimed the Earth, and we see John happy with his wife, admiring the world he had just helped to form. One where humans would be the leaders of their own destiny. Where the only heroes are powerless characters like Batman, willing to walk as one of us and guide us on a path of peace. However, something is missing. Constantine then looks for Rip Hunter and gives him instructions to give to his past self to start the temporal loop again that would set in motion all these events that brought us here. Meanwhile, the past Constantine, who had been warning the heroes of his time about the Twilight future, is confused as he doesn't know if his warnings worked. After warning everyone he can, he receives a letter from Rip Hunter written by his future self, which reads as follows. Dear past self, I regret having used you in this way. You've done everything right, but in reality what you did was help me set in motion my own future, one that had to happen. How do I know? I've already lived what you're living. This letter you're reading is the same one I received. I don't know or care who wrote it originally. The point is, I used you like my future self used me, and I apologize for that. But don't feel bad, it'll be worth it. Soon, a girl will ask you to light her cigarette, and when you do and look into her eyes, you'll know she's the one you want to spend your life with. She will fill that void you've carried all your life, and in the future you will be happy and understand why I had to do this. The past Constantine looks at the letter with anger. He had scammed himself and there was nothing he could do to remedy it. Over the next few days, he remained angry, unable to do anything about it, until a girl approached him in a bar and asked him to light her cigarette. When this happened, Constantine turned to look at her coldly and said, "I'm sorry, I don't smoke." The girl shrugged, and the most important conversation in Constantine's life never took place. He simply sat in the corner of the bar, feeling miserable for having condemned himself to be unhappy, but at least he would teach his future self that no one messes with John Constantine. Thank you.